Well, welcome to Standards and Assessment. Officially 17 minutes late, but it was for a good cause. So let's just go around and introduce people around the perimeter and at the table, and then we'll get started. Why don't we start with Linda? Thanks. Oh, what is your name?
I thought you were going to start with Linda Hansen.
No, you silly goose.
Linda Hanks. I am a local board member for Two Elk School District and representing Utah School Boards Association, our local boards.
Anything you're here to talk about?
Work with companies.
Yes,
as we learned this morning.
So thank you for welcoming Dr. Darrington.
Oh, he was great.
Welcome. Thank you.
Or I could just introduce everyone. Brian?
Hi, Brian. Sorry, Brian. Question area to do with council for the board.
Thank you, Brian.
Hi, Kathy Davis, Suicide Prevention for the Utah State. For y'all.
I like that.
Sorry, it's Friday.
Y'all. Nice.
I'm Anna Thomas with Voices for Utah Children.
Nice.
Ricky Scott, Science Specialist in Teaching.
Ashley DePig, CTE Education Specialist. Talia Longhurst, Director of Career and Technical Education.
Jennifer Brownson, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Mary Young, Implementation Coach here at the agency.
Kathy Davis, Director of Internal Audit.
Jared Wright with USBE Assessment.
Nice. Jennifer Gravitt, District 4 and junior high teacher.
Hi, Linda Hansen. I represent District 3. Chihuahua Juab, Salt Lake. Did I forget? Chihuahua Juab, Salt Lake, Granite. There's 5 of them. Chintic. Sorry. Chintic.
Wow. Janet Cannon in District 8. I'm a lot of Granite and Olive Murray.
Scott Hansen, District 2, Ogden and Weber School Districts.
Norley Green, Committee Secretary.
Lisa Cummins, District 11, Olive Jordan School District, a tiny snippet of Canyons, and a corner of Alpine School District.
Ooh, I like the descriptive one.
Right. Patty Norman, Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement.
Okay, here we go. So our first item is 6.1, the Cyclical Standards Review, and those of you on the committee remember that we started this process back in October, and we asked staff to, actually I don't know when we started it, in April, but we asked staff to add some, maybe some numerical values to the rubric categories, and I think Jennifer Thronson's here to talk about it with us.
Thank you for having me. So Jennifer Tronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. I tried to incorporate your feedback from our last meeting into the new draft. So a couple of pieces as I dug into the legislation and the code and all of the pieces, to me, and talking with Brian as well, does seem that there needs to be a timeline, like an actual timeline. Not saying you couldn't have things that trigger outside of the timeline. So I'm coming to you with kind of a coupled system of here's a timeline that LEAs can anticipate when a review might be coming, but it's not a guarantee that that is when. Other than that would instantly cue a trigger for a review. So you've got a timeline piece. I tried to be considerate of when big adoptions would be occurring due to LEA budgets. So not putting in some of the big core concept areas at the same year. So there is some movement around some of those. So you'll notice they won't do science and math the same year, even though they might have laid out in a 7-year cycle being together. Just to try and alleviate the weight of something like an ELA adoption, you'll notice there's not a big adoption for 3 years after that, to try and give people time to compensate to get ready for math adoption, because it does cost a lot of money that they really have to save for. I did present this as a draft to some of the curriculum directors just to get their feedback, and they were, one, excited to have an anticipated timeline so they can plan their years, even knowing, the caveat is it could still be triggered sooner. And they did like that we didn't have any heavy adoptions in a certain year, so that they could have time to kind of save up in between. So that is kind of the first piece of the puzzle. Blue in that timeline are the pieces that are required by code for us to actually review. The other ones are not required, but we have been reviewing them previously. So world languages, library media, and driver's education. So I just wanted you to know which ones are required versus optional, whether you want them on the timeline or not. So that is piece 1. Should I stop and do questions?
So I'm looking here. So science is done in 2019, and then we look again at it in 2024,
And here's the reason for science. Science is an oddity, and so is social studies. Because we had 6-8 done 3 years ago, you kind of have to move the timeline up to compensate for 6-8 being done. And so science will come back a little sooner in terms of K-12 science. Okay. I did consult with Ricky.
So when it's done in 24-25, you'll look at K-12. You won't look at piecemeal.
Yeah. So these are some good fine points to pick up on. Social studies, for example, we did 7-12 initially, and now we're going to, with this proposal, we'd be doing K-6 starting next year. But in 7 years, we would then put them back together as one system.
That's my question.
That is good.
Because it seems to me, well, I know because Diana bragged about it, and she probably should have, that we did 6 sets of standards with, not last year, but the year before. Is that right? And so do all of those come up at the same time again?
No.
She staggered.
So I staggered based on, so some of them are sooner than you would expect. So fine arts is a little earlier than you would expect. But we had so many in 1 year.
I can't remember how many there were. There were a bunch.
Yeah. So on the blue column, you'll have the year they were last revised officially. Okay. So social studies was 2010. Yeah, just to kind of help you to see that 2015 to 16 year. We
did a ton.
6 standards on that. So this kind of broke some back out. Like I said, it's not a perfect 7 for any of them, but over time it would be about 7.
Okay.
And I took that from the data you shared. I looked at what the states did. Yeah. The range was between 3 to 10 years was the frequency that they were doing revisions. The average was more 6 to 7 years. So I went with the 7 year, knowing we have another trigger that could potentially trigger it earlier than 7 years. Again, that's flexible, but just trying to bring the ideas that were shared and looking at it from a global.
That leaves social studies way out there, though, it looks like.
Social studies, with where it is right now, and so there's a couple places it could go. We just didn't want to put it with a heavy year. You don't want to, the place I would optimally probably put is 2023, 24, but you've got math that year as well. And so since they're both K-12 adoptions, math is a heavy price point. The only other way you could do it is do 20, 22, 23. But you'd really be doing probably just a light touch on elementary, which would be fine. But you'd be basically doing probably at least a more significant revision on the secondary.
If you look at it, you're 10 years before we start it. It's 12 years before we implement it. That seems like...
Oh, so up above is you've got the K-6. So K-6 would be done next year. So it's really the K-6 would be on the 7-year schedule. It'd be the 7 through 12 that would be about a decade before they'd be truly reviewed.
But again, knowing that there could be triggers.
It can be
I
triggered.
think we've got a balance in place. Like I think it's kind of nice to have a timeline where there's some predictability, but also some flexibility so that we can trigger them if need be.
Probably the earliest you could do it in terms of not doing it during a major quarter would be that 1 more year earlier, because driver's ed and health aren't huge adoptions. You could put social studies in but you'd have 3 standards happening at that point.
Patty,
so I'm wondering if, as we look through this, not really deciding on the cycle at this point, because first we have to look at the triggers or the levers to be able to say, at some point you might be able to review a set of standards with these particular questions and that rubric, then you might say it's not time. And so then it's going to be put off for another time. So that timeline is there as a timeline, as a guide, but according to this process that's being implemented and decided on today, there might be different times where we might say, let's put it off for another year or another year. So we might want to look at that before going back and deciding exactly where those things should be.
Let's look at the other components, because it is a system. I tried to think about this as there's multiple layers of it. So the next piece, I'd probably take you to the review checklist document before we actually look at the rubric, just to kind of give you those pieces. I'm sorry, I noticed the edits are still in there, but you'll just know we added core to be clear, so it didn't get confused with the CTE standards. So the Utah Core Standards Revision and Review Checklist, basically looking at what other states are doing, having multiple triggers, kind of like we want multiple data points to inform us around student achievement and things like that, doing something similar for the standards. So there's about 5 things that could trigger a standards revision, and having at least 2 of those occur outside of the timeline. At least 2 of those need to occur in order for a revision or review to happen prior to the timeline instance. So for example, if we were going to do this with ELA, well, we're thinking it'll be 2 years from now, but if ELA goes through and does the standards revision rubric and then hits the threshold, and there has been some significant change in the field, there has been some of that, then they would queue for a revision now instead of waiting till their actual timeline. But leaving at least 2 boxes allows us to kind of have a little more kind of gusto to the process to make sure not one thing's triggering it, but we have multiple indicators kind of leading us there. So one is the revision rubric that we'll look at in a moment. The next would be new peer-reviewed or evidence-based research that indicates a need for substantial revisions to the standard. So some major news comes out and we're like, oh, we should be responsive to this. That would be one. Changes in the labor market indicate a need for substantial revision. So just if something happens in the field or in the economy in Utah, we need to kind of be responsive to that. That would be an opportunity. Legislative statute requires a substantial revision.
I have a question about that one.
Yes.
I would think that if that box is checked, then we don't need 2 boxes. Because
it's possible. You're right.
About the same
It
thing.
depends on what
Is that your question?
Same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
It depends
I
on
think that's a single
what it
box.
says in terms of the revision. Now, if they say you have to,
Yeah.
or they might say you may, like that kind of thing. But yes, if they say it has to, everything gets superseded anyway, right? Or,
Lisa, did you have a question?
Yeah, I would still say at least have a board member or the board approve that as well, and not just because I don't want to be dictated to by.
And that's why it's
we would still come through the process.
Right, so at least 2 boxes, yeah.
And then public feedback received demonstrates a need to change the standards. So I'm proposing doing an annual just core standards survey to the public for all stakeholders. So parents, teachers, leaders, whoever really wants to fill it out, community members, just their general feelings about the core and any comments they might have. And so we would develop a survey. Wisconsin has a similar survey that they put out that's more generic. It's not about any particular standards, but we might say, do you have comments to make on ELA and math, so all of these standards, and then if we get a kind of overwhelming amount on a particular set of content standards, then that would give us another piece of something to consider. So just kind of bringing in multiple pieces, and that would be an annual survey we would just do every year and use that data to help in the queuing of triggering an earlier review than what the rubric might say as one piece. So I added a layer that we didn't have last time. I want to be clear with you on that. But as I was going through doing the revision rubric, it felt to me more comfortable to say we have multiple kind of factors telling us it's time to queue it for the 7 years rather than relying on any one sole source to kind of get us there. So let's go to the rubric just to kind of add to the layers of complexity here. So the rubric went through it with the teaching and learning staff, got their feedback. We had some really good discussion around it, and then also took it to the Northern Utah Curriculum Directors Group to get their feedback on thoughts and suggestions to refine it to make sure, like, from the field, would they think this is a valid tool for us to be using. And so within those, you'll notice it has some differences from before. There are some changes. The biggest change is we took out the performance factors section from a perspective of standards aren't the reason you have poor performance. It's instruction is the cause of poor performance for subgroups or demographic groups, those types of things. So putting in, are there achievement gaps? You're going to always see achievement gaps. If we don't change instruction, it's not necessarily directly tied to a standards issue. So you'll see that kind of drawn out. And feel free to disagree, but
yes,
in terms of so, and then the quantifiable pieces, you'll see I put some point values on them and made it more of a rubric of particular thresholds of when you would score into that point value. And then there's weighting of the categories. So academic factors would be the most weighted area, and followed by community and implementation factors. Determining a threshold trigger level is also something we might want to talk about. At what point level do you trigger a review? So is it you get 80% or something like that? Are we going a little lower, saying this is one piece of this trigger system that if we get that threshold, then that box is checked on the checklist. So those are all of the components.
Do we have questions from board members about gender?
Well, I'm just wondering, under community factors, and so you're doing this annual survey of stakeholders, and then how do you determine, are you saying 5% of the people who fill out the survey?
Of the total population.
Of the total so the number of people who fill out the survey is inconsequential.
Correct.
So how do you determine
well, within
that?
So let's say there's 20,000 kids, or like there's 600,000 kids, right? 600 something. So you look for a percentage within that 600,000. What percentage of the people are replying in this way? If you only look at quantity, the worry is, and the curriculum directors brought this up, is that you would just have parent groups that would just influx the system and they'd get to 5% of the total survey responses rather than considering the total population.
Okay, so
does that make sense?
I don't really. I mean,
so it has to be
that seems like a hard threshold.
Yeah.
To meet. In my mind, I can't quite see how you would determine if 1 out of 4 people were upset about a standard.
But again, that in and of itself couldn't trigger the review.
This is just a contributing factor to the review.
Yeah, so it's only 15%, but it just seems like the numbers seem unmeetable or like.
Scott?
Yeah, I think anytime we set up something like this, it's going to be hard to tell what the numbers are actually going to look like until we do it.
Yeah, and we can definitely refine over time.
What I'd like to see in the beginning is instead of just the points, I'd like to see the actual numbers for each of these so that we can see kind of how it falls. Absolutely. And then when we talk about a threshold, it seems to me we'd want to make like a Pareto chart and just see which ones are the highest. And that, instead of having a threshold, I mean, we could have none of them hit 40%, but we want to know these are the 3 highest, so these are most likely to.
Okay, that's a good point. Because what's the frequency you guys are thinking on this for the staff to complete for their subject each time? Every 2 years, every year? What's kind of the...
So is this related to your annual survey, or is this independent of the annual survey?
It connects to the survey, but the survey would be its own. So if you have a survey piece that's really a lot of public feedback is saying, hey, these need to be looked at, that would cue all on its own. That's why I wasn't as worried about it being a small indicator here, because it has its ability to cue it all by itself.
And Jennifer, what do you think is reasonable in terms of frequency?
I was thinking every couple years.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Standards that just got revised, they would, like, health would, like if we start this next year, health would not.
So maybe every 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some kind of frequency, and we would just do it as a staff. Everyone fill theirs out, and then we can submit the point values. I would think we'll just color code, like here's where this one fell in.
So I'm wondering if we should just, some of these, and maybe it's different for different people, but for me, I think some of the stakeholders would be weighted separately. So do we survey educators separate from everybody else? Are there questions we can ask educators that we couldn't ask parents? Because quite frankly, there's a lot of parents who have no idea we have standards at all.
Yeah.
Right? They just don't know. They just
and you're not going to get 1 out of 4 of them to make
we can have a stakeholder survey where you say, what role do you serve? And then it gives different questions for that role. So it's the same link for everyone, but when you say I'm an educator, it gives you a different set of questions.
And I think if educators knew, like every 2 years you're going to get surveyed, I think that could be something consistent. I think we would
they have an avenue for feedback. Yeah, because right now,
we don't really know.
It's not a great tool for it.
Yeah.
Would there be some kind of anonymity there? Because I know that sometimes educators feel
it would be totally
challenged.
My intent would be anonymous.
Yeah,
completely for anyone.
Although I don't think with standards, most teachers would be willing to.
Well, so, I don't know. So some teachers have told me they don't like the standards and they're afraid who do they talk to, right? So
there's value in that.
So we can do Qualtrics anonymously. Yeah. You can even put, if you guys want, would you like to add your name? I don't see any value. I'm not going to go track them down and say tell me more, most likely. So maybe anonymous would make the most sense. But.
Yeah, or at least I would like to have some anonymous.
And as Patty was saying, what if we brought back a survey sample that we could look at?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
would that be something we could do? You, Patty?
Because as I was thinking of it, if we're talking about numbers, or even if we're talking about what rises to the top as the largest concern, if we're talking about educators are most knowledgeable about their subject matter. Yeah. So if you were talking to a mathematics teacher, they might not know what's most currently being taught in social studies.
Right.
And so then we would get a low end size of respondents because of the number where every student's required to take such and such. In some areas they're not, so we would still not reach a maximum end size to have it raised to the top. So we might even be able to disaggregate according to Qualtrics, what do you know.
How many actually were in that area.
Yeah, and then from those respondents in that area to
absolutely.
So maybe staff can go back to the drawing board. Well, this can move forward, and then as part of it to come back and look at an iteration of a type of survey, and probably developed within Qualtrics or something like that, because it's really good disaggregating those
doing the multiple layers.
That feels like a really important component of this that we want to refine before.
Well, and I think this gets at the how do we handle public comment?
Yeah.
In an ongoing way rather than only when the revisions are here. Like, how do we get feedback along the way? And so I wanted to add a layer to this system. Well, they'd have an element at this point. Yeah, but parents, community members, like if there's things that are going on that we're just not aware of, or they're sending them to people that don't have the influence of this, or they're just talking with their friends and never sending anything in. This way we at least have a way to gather that information. So let's, we can definitely just develop kind of what that could look like and have some feedback from this committee around, are these the right questions? Or, and having those layers of here's what the educator, an educator, I think it would be, again, they can just say NA if they don't want to talk to the science standards because they're the English teacher, and they can just pick the stuff that makes sense for them. We can make that work.
So do we need a motion to finalize this?
Well, and I don't know if we can finalize if you're going to bring that back, or can we?
You could probably have a motion to finalize this, and then there could be a supporting document that's brought back just for review, similar to like when we do a manual or then something as a supporting document or an FAQ. So this could be finalized, and then just as a point to bring back.
Because I don't know how the rest of the committee feels, but I really like the setup of this and kind of the checks and balances and the kind of three-tiered system almost. But
So,
Patty,
within that motion, maybe in clarifying which of the documents you're saying yes to within the motion, because if we're deciding differently on the weights and the points and whatnot, that would be a part of that.
That's what I was thinking. That's why I wanted
So you just want the model
and the standards revision and review, and then have the, let's see, is it the checklist?
Yeah, the checklist. Revision time. Do you want the timeline? Is that what you want?
The revision cycle model, the checklist, but the revision and review, we want to look at the
rubric.
We want that to be brought back with the weighting, with example supporting documents, with example surveys. So
do you want like a few specialists to try it out and bring it back?
I would love
so
that.
Kind of
If
see
you
it.
that'd be helpful.
So we want to finalize the Utah Core Standards revision and review checklist and the timeline.
So anyway, if somebody would be willing to make a motion.
I wanted to make a motion.
I think you do want to, so please do.
Yeah. I would move that we would approve the core revision cycle model, right? And the standard, which one is
standard
it?
Checklist.
The checklist, right? And send it to the board for final approval.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is to finalize the core revision cycle model and the standards checklist, but hold that thought because Dr. Norman has something to say.
Just wanted to capture what Board Member Hansen talked about when you said, and there was some agreement with the checklist, that if it was something to do with the legislative statute, that is not a two-step process, but then there was some disagreement. So are we, I'm not sure where, because that was
I was speaking more towards the industry requiring, not the legislature. Obviously, if the legislature says to do it.
So if the legislature, so that would then not be a two-box checklist?
Maybe we just need an asterisk on that.
Yeah, so including
with
the amended asterisks.
Yes, okay.
That's what I wanted to
So let me restate that then.
Okay, sorry.
One more thing that's just an editorial, I guess, on here. On some of these, it doesn't say assess. Is that
Which
something
one?
we did on
Sorry.
purpose?
He's
I'm looking
talking
at
about
revision
the
timeline.
Revision timeline.
We have
Core
adopt,
revision cycle
implement,
model.
some
Only
say
the
assess. That's only
tested
on
subjects that have assessments.
So that assesses just the assessments that we're going
that
to
we develop,
look at
So they might have
afterwards.
their own local assessments, but in terms of what we
So that's not us assessing the standard other than the assessment being
like
finished.
RISE or those types of things. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Asterisks for legislative statute requires a substantial.
Okay. Do you want to okay. Linda, I think this is your motion. The motion before the committee is to finalize the cyclical standards review process as well as the standards checklist with the asterisk that says
a second box may not be necessary.
Thank you for saying that. Especially if it's a legislative issue.
I'm just going to put it after the legislative with the asterisk there, and then it makes sense for that.
Norlie, do you have that?
It says if it's not necessary.
The second box may not be necessary. I'm just going to hit the asterisk here.
Let's put a statute
down.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any discussion?
If I could just have clarification, will this, with the concern with the math standards that I've had throughout the last almost 2 years and a half, that it's not going to be set up this standard, but on the checklist part where it's already.
Remember, it could be any of them.
Okay, so yes,
which I hope takes into account like a timeline.
Because we've already
districts want.
Because we've already heard from the public concerns about it, and I've had my concerns about it, so I think that fulfills that too.
I think so too.
Okay. Good to know.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Oh, but do we also need to direct you to bring back, or did we already do that? Do we need that in a motion?
Is that a motion?
Okay, so.
I think we can just bring
Okay, so we're okay with that.
Thank you, Jessica. I will do that.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing a little complexity.
Thanks for taking a really complex thing and putting it
a little
into.
complex like this, but this makes me so good.
I love what you've done with it.
Okay. Objection to this motion. Okay, we'll just keep going. Okay, just keep going.
Oh no.
He was really fast, Mark.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
He was fantastic.
Okay, action item 6.2 is the computer science standards. And that we're going to bring Talia along. Oh no, Ashley Higgs and Talia. Okay, she's going to take it. So this is the one we started in October of 2018, where we approved the K-12 computer science framework. It's time. They're seeking a 30-day public comment. I think Ashley's here to talk to us about public comment and maybe give us some background information so that we can send these out for a 30-day public review.
Okay, thank you. So again, I am Ashley Higgs. I'm the CT, one of the CTE education specialists. Oh, sorry, Patty.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We just wanted to preface this conversation with the K-5 computer science standards. At the beginning of this work was from the legislature and bringing together the group of a task force that was all throughout the state with computer science standards and to develop a framework. A framework was developed. There was a framework that was approved. That is just a resource document. That is not going to be the work of the board in moving this forward. So it is a resource document where the standards and strands are going to now be created by Utah teachers. And so what you're hearing today is the work that is original work by Utah teachers for Utah students in the standards and strands.
Wonderful.
Okay. So, like Dr. Norman said, this is original work. We brought in educators throughout the state to create the K-5 computer science standards. I'm just going to kind of let you know the process of how we created this document, and if you have questions, feel free to ask. So back in June of 2018, the board approved recommendations for computer science and creating a K-12 framework for that. In that, we created a vision, which the vision was each student in secondary public schools will have access to robust and varied computer science courses by 2022. All students will enter secondary schools with exposure to computational thinking and competencies in digital literacy. This begins in our elementary schools with competencies in keyboarding, appropriate and responsible use of technology, and basic coding principles. So with that, this is kind of the process we're in right now. So we have developed and implemented the statewide K-12 computer science. Now we're in the process of kind of working from the elementary level and getting kids engaged in that, as well as improving upon current course requirements to scaffold the computer science. So I'm going to kind of go through the design process as well as the computer science K-5 standard course concepts and practices, as well as the key takeaways we took from the writers, and then the next steps in this process. So on March 15th, we met with a variety of Utah teachers, principals. We had district leaders. We also had university experts come and help us draft the K-5 standards. In that process, we had them look at these standards in multiple lenses so that we could have a clear, concise standard for the K-5. And so they looked at the criteria and how it related to their standard. And then, like I said, we revised it in many different lenses. Those lenses, and once we created it, then we reviewed it as a grade band to make sure that it was cohesive in the process. Those lenses that we looked at is they first looked at it from an integration of practices and concepts, and I'll show you what those were in the next slide. We also looked at the rigor of the standard. We also looked at the focus and manageability, specificity.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
You did
Okay,
right.
I have to say it slow. And then we also looked at equity and diversity, clarity and accessibility, as well as measurability. So these standards were looked at a bunch of different focuses so that we could understand what it was that we wanted students to walk away with. So, the computer science concepts. Now, like Dr. Norman said, these are unique Utah standards. As we were working in a team, the original core concepts only included computer systems, networks and the internet, data analysis, impacts of computing, and algorithms and processing. Our group thought it was really important to include computational thinking. So that was something that we added that wasn't necessarily at the beginning of this process, but we liked how it turned out and the thoughts that were put into it. We also had the core practices, which will align to what the standards are, and I'll talk about as you look at the documents. You'll notice that there's some wording that is green or bolded or underlined, and we'll talk about why we set it up that way. Questions or continue to go?
Define a computational artifact for me.
Which one are you talking about? So those are artifacts like creating things. So they're creating artifacts. So it could be a data visual. It could be an actual graph. It could be
would it be an app?
Yeah, it could be an app. It could be a program. It could be a physical thing. It could be a visual. Anything like that. So the key takeaways. If you look at the document, one of the big things that the stakeholders talked about is that they needed to have definitions, and that this is going to be something that is brand new to a lot of K-5 educators. And so we wanted to make sure that if a first grade teacher saw the word algorithm, that they weren't terrified of it. You'll also notice that in the standards below that there's a narrative, because we wanted to make sure that educators understood what the standard was talking about. Not necessarily meaning that our standard didn't make sense, but because this is so brand new in the K-5 realm, we wanted to make sure that they understood what they were really already probably doing in their classroom, and to kind of give them an idea of, oh, I know how to implement it this way and that way. And then what that looks like. So if you take a look at the standards, in all of the standards, you'll notice that some have, or all of them have a green text or something that is underlined or bolded. The underlined word is the vocabulary word that will be found in the glossary at the end of the document. So that helps teachers make sure that they're teaching the right definition, and they're not assuming like, okay, I know what a loop is, or I know what a computing device is, but it's giving them a basic definition that all teachers are working from. You'll also notice that there's green text. This is the alignment to the practice that is located at the end of the standards. So the practice language is in parentheses at the end of the standard, and then in the standard you'll see the green language that aligns to that practice. Okay. The other thing is that a lot of them are super excited, but they want the professional development. They want to understand, like, this is so new, I'm nervous, because they're like, oh my gosh. But as we've gone kind of throughout the state and have done things here and there at the elementary level, teachers are walking away like, oh, I just bought this so I could implement it into my classroom, and I never thought about teaching this concept like that. So they're super excited. They're nervous, let's be honest, but they are beyond excited to have this opportunity and a way to teach things that they are teaching in their classroom. So the next steps is that we present today asking for public comment for 30 days. Once public comment is taken, we'll have our writing teams back in August to look at the feedback and adjust as necessary. And then we'll present to the board September, October of 2019. And then once approved, we'll work with teaching and learning to create an integration guidance document for math, science, language arts. So, questions, Patty?
So, just as a reminder that this falls under the 5-step standards revision process, And so that's there's a link to that right here. So this would be on the number.
It should be attached to.
It's the third document.
That's
so
good
this
to
is
know
number
where
2.
we are. Too. Lisa, questions, comment?
So understanding that this is legislative and industry driven, what is this replacing? Because, a classroom time is only so much. So, and we already know we're lacking on some things academic-wise. But what are we, where is this going to fit on a daily average? Go ahead.
So the purpose isn't to replace anything. This is kind of more of a different approach into teaching what is being taught in the elementary levels. So instead, you'll have your typical, an example that we did in a classroom.
So it's integrated with other standards.
Exactly. So for example, we went into a first grade class. And we asked them, okay, what's your spelling words? What are you working on? That sort of thing. And so what we did is we used a code and go mouse, and we had them spell out their spelling words using the code and go mouse. Nice. And so there's still spelling, but it's just a different way, and it's teaching them about how to break down. So then we did a Scratch Junior, where we had them creating coding, and they had to have their, what's the little Swift guy called? Sprite. There we go. I was like, what is it? Had their Sprite. They had to spell the word, and then we had them do a flipgram, where it's a 45-second video, and we said, okay, what is it that we learned in this sort of thing? Another thing we did in another classroom was they were talking about collecting data. This was in a second grade class, collecting data, creating graphs. And so we taught them how to do a Google form and how to do different types of questioning in that way. So students were, instead of going around to each of the individuals, they were doing things like that. And so it's not replacing, it's just integrating and showing a different way how to do it.
And if I may, one of the things, if you look, I think I'm on page 13, and I'm on standard 1, CT.1, and it's determine the steps needed to solve a problem. So really what it's doing is it's aligning vertically and horizontally across grade levels and throughout integrated curriculum. So integrating into other curriculum. So for example, if you look at what it says, students will analyze a real-world problem, such as creating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and develop instructions that define the steps necessary to achieve the intended outcome. The connection with computer science is the need to be clear and detailed with action steps so the outcome is what is desired. There's also part of this within mathematics about being clear and detailed with instructions and how that leads to algorithmic processes. So this is then just making those connections and then being able to have that common vocabulary. One of the things that was found is when there was something that, let's say in an automotive class, and there was something in a mathematics class, even in secondary education, they were talking about fractions, and in the mathematics class they were talking about numerators and denominators, and then in the automotive class they were talking about the number of lines away from the number 3 on the ruler. And so they started talking about, well, we call it this and we call it that. Well, then let's call it the same thing, because then students realize they're learning the same thing and not something different in each of them. So it creates that common vocabulary and that ability to show their knowledge in a different way.
So it's not compartmentalized.
So it's not compartmentalized. And so that, and I think what's really important is when the teachers got together, you heard that in the CBE, competency-based education conversation this morning, is this isn't a bunch of kids on computers all of the time. It's a way of thinking and acting and being able to process information and having the vocabulary necessary to do that so that students, it becomes transparent, because usually it was invisible. So we're going to write down steps of a sandwich. What's that called? It's called sequencing. Oh, and we're going to learn sequencing in mathematics, and we're going to learn the way to write whatever in English language arts. So they have that ability, and then they can actually learn to greater depths of knowledge because of it.
Nice. Any other questions, Scott?
Yeah, so you just touched on something that I was thinking of. Most parental concerns that I've heard with regard to this is we don't want our kids in kindergarten to become coders and spend 5 hours on computers and all that. Do we have anything in this that addresses that as far as expectations of screen time, or this all isn't?
That would
I
be
can
an
see
LEA
that this,
choice.
Yeah, so we don't have any expectation. Right now,
so when we've gone out into the classroom, when we did the last one, which was a first grade class, we didn't get on iPads to do Scratch until the last hour. of the day.
I understand that, and you
yeah.
understand that. I just wonder if there's anything in the document. There
And I
isn't
think
right
that
now.
would go to the professional development, as once these get approved and as we start doing professional development for teachers, it's not, we're replacing our teaching with an app on an iPad. It's not that. It's more of a, here's another way to introduce how to sequence for, so we did the peanut butter and jelly activity, and it was, and she said, oh, I wish I would have known that as we were starting to write sentences and trying to get concepts, so then they could say, okay, well, this isn't clear, you know, and that sort of thing. And so it was more of an eye-opener that they're like, oh, I never thought of teaching it this way. And so a lot of these activities that when we give the narratives, if you'll notice, it's not on devices. It's more.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm just trying to get ahead of what I think
And
about
that's
the
something we
comments
could
are
put in
going
the
to
guiding
be.
document.
Yeah, and that can also be.
I think that would be, you'd be more comfortable. I would feel more
Yes.
comfortable with the guiding document to kind of.
And I think that's the next step once the resources come about.
Good.
Is
This might be something to think about,
Mhm.
hitting that
No,
head
that's
on
right.
instead of trying to dodge it.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I may also add on to Board Member Hanson's concerns, I'm concerned with second graders using Google, only because of the data that's collected on them. If I were a parent, I'd not be happy. So maybe parental notification, opt-in types, options would be aware that that data is being collected both at the Google level and USB-E level or local district, whatever level that's on, so that parents know exactly what's being collected. Transparency is key on that. So, okay.
Any other questions?
I noticed that I just saw this the other day, that the American Association of Pediatrics, they're saying an hour of screen time a day for kids 2 to 5. That's the recommendation.
0 up to 2, I heard that too. And then an hour 2 to 5.
I think that could that be in the guiding document in terms of research and recommendations from, So that's something that will be brought back to us we can look at.
Perfect.
Is there somebody want to make a motion? Go ahead.
I move that we send the computer science standards out for a 30-day public review and ask the board to do so.
Okay. The motion before the committee is to release the K-5 computer science standards draft for a 30-day public review and ask the full board to do the same. Any discussion with the motion?
Yes. Will that be some kind of a survey thing that you could link the?
Yeah, we're going to create a Qualtrics so that we can. So it'll be by grade band. It will ask like what their role is, that sort of thing. Qualtrics, and then that way it will. So they're not going through. And the first thing is, do you have comment? If so, what? And it will be based off of the standard.
Could we get a link to it? Did the committee members have a link to?
Yeah,
and will it be on the USB-E homepage like the science standards? Okay. So it's easy to access.
If I may, one more request. Link the code that talks about all of this that was passed this last session.
Oh, what code? I'm not sure what.
Wasn't there something the ledges was funding? Could you link that funding? That funding.
It's a little bit different than this.
Is
it?
it?
Let's refer specifically to competitive grants, to the LEAs to implement computer science, which we're not ready to implement yet. We're continuing to work on that.
Okay, that's clarified. Okay, good. Okay, I thought it was a legislative ask of this go
They
forward.
will work parallel together, but
Okay.
it is still a bit separate.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. We have approved the release of the K-5 Computer Science Standards draft for a 30-day public review. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you. I'll be back later.
Of course you will. Okay, 6.3, standards revision process. She's back. For more.
If you didn't get enough of me.
It is a beautiful document. So we have Jennifer here to talk to us about the standards revision process. And I love that we can differentiate between statute etc. I just visually it makes so much sense to me. So go ahead and talk to us about it, and then we'll ask you what we need to.
Okay. So there were, as I dug into this, being kind of new to this ask, there were a couple of pieces, and this is how my brain works on paper. So I apologize if your brain doesn't work this way. But trying to say what is actually required, knowing you guys want to look at the policy and what's not required, what's for choice, that kind of thing. And then also looking for opportunities to speed up the process. What I heard from the committee last time was, is there a way to trim things down? So I have some potential ways. You might have other suggestions of areas that, could this be a consent calendar item? Could these be combined and we bring both of you in one meeting rather than two separate meetings? So just some suggestions around ways to potentially shorten it. Statute does require that it has to take a year from when the public is notified that we're doing this. So we can't do anything less than a year, which is, it's good for me to know. But in terms of, do we need to take 2 or more years? Probably not. Depending on, it's not that going fast to get it done is the purpose, but when we get to the standards revision, as you know, they've been 7 years, if that's where we're headed. It takes a year, it's 8 years, and then it's 9 years by the time it's
then there's the research. We should start over.
So we want to kind of speed up some of this. So the blue is what is required by statute in terms of the steps. The steps are what's currently in your most recent policy, or at least piece. There is a policy on this as well that Brian and Michelle led me to that you had in place for the Standards Review Committee. So there's a couple of documents that this comes from to kind of couple it together. So if there was specificity in any of those policies, I referenced it in the details and then put if it's required by, just so you knew where that language was coming from. So just kind of looking through, I don't know what the best way to do this is. I'm thinking step by step unless you have a better way.
I like it.
All right, so step 1, notice of revision by the board. What's required in statute is that the board chair picks 7 members to join that review committee. And then we also have the 5 from the Hill or from the Senate.
Define members. It doesn't mean state board members.
No, it's like community, whoever you think would make sense for that, for the SRC committee. I could clarify that too. And then, so that's required. Currently, that's been more of a, we're going to come and ask and we'll get that, and then we'll come and get that approved. And because it's the board chair, that really could just be a consent calendar.
Yes.
Like if we're asking for these members, then the chair could give us those members. So that would be a couple months cut right there. So if you're good with that, that might be one potential. The next is Standards Review Committee meets to make the initial recommendations. In statute, it requires 2 meetings. In board policy, you've also added that within 3 months of the initial meeting, they need to have the 2 meetings. So there is a time frame that's required. It can be done in a month, it could be done in a week, but there has to be 2 meetings within 3 months based on statute and current policy. And so that would then come back to you all in March, April, to kind of just give updates more than anything.
Pause for a minute. Linda has a question.
Yes.
So is 3 months reasonable? I mean, could we do 60 days?
You could change the policy.
I mean, is that too fast for you guys?
I don't think so, because once they get reviewing, you honestly meet 1 week, give them a couple weeks in between to meet again to get the information.
What I noticed before.
This just says you're basically saying to the staff, you can't take more than 3 months. Staff should be saying, I want it done in a month.
Yeah,
right?
So I'm wondering if we,
if you want to
the
shorten
statute
it, that's
says
an opportunity.
no longer than 3 months.
The statute doesn't quantify it.
No.
That's board policy that you guys have in place.
But I could see staff looking at that and going, hey, well, we've got 3 months to do this. And so if we said 60 days, then they'd go, oh, 60 days.
Yep. You could definitely
unless there was something, a complication.
Being released.
I think it might be wise to, I don't know how you guys feel, keep that there just in case.
And I can communicate to our staff.
Go as fast as you want.
Go fast, go quicker.
Yeah.
The minimum or maximum amount of time you can take is 3 months. And so maybe it's just the way I convey that information to staff. Mm-hmm. I don't see any of them taking. No one has taken, to my knowledge, 3 months.
Most of them want to get it done.
They do. Yeah. They're excited. That's the work that is exciting to staff when they are up for standards, because that's like major work, and then it leads to implementation, which is, I think, the reason most of our staff are here. And so that's the Standard Review Committee. Then you move to, we come back to the board to review those comments and recommendations. And I added comments because in statute it says comments. It's not necessarily required. It was just my clarifying my knowledge of what is required. So that's what the red is for. And then in your policy, we add, instead of just comments and recommendations, it also says research, add and eliminate content, amend the format, provide clarity. You give additional things that committee can be doing. It really just adds specificity, doesn't really change what statutes require. It just adds a little more definition. But then you also have within 2 months of the second committee meeting. So the staff member is supposed to bring back those recommendations within 2 months. I think this was to make sure we didn't just have the meetings, but you actually learned about what came out of the meetings in a reasonable amount of time. And sometimes if that's, happened in June, well, they can't come in July because we're not a meeting. So it's 2 months is probably a reasonable piece. And that takes a couple months because we come to committee and then approved by full board. And then the writing committee can get organized once it's passed full board in June, and they can work. From talking with the most recent revision folks, it takes about 6 months for most of them to do their writing. So that's what this timeline projects, is a kind of a 6-month window. A little less, but pretty close. And then we would come back to you with revision recommendations and progress to the board with the brief updates during the revision process. So frequency, I wasn't sure what you desired there. It's not in policy. It's not required by statute, and it's not in policy if you want them coming every month, if you want every couple of months. Knowing it might take about 6 months, what's the frequency you want would be a question I would love for you to tell us. And we can include that. And then turning to the next page was 6 and 7. The blue, again, is statute required. So we have to submit the draft standards and public review proposal to the board and publicize on the USB website and the Utah Public Notice website. So we would do that in December, full board approval, January when they would go. And then 7 is public review, including review by any applicable advisory committees and all of those pieces. And this is the 90 days, and the statute requires the 3 public hearings in different regions of the state. And so at that point, those steps in terms of getting that charge, publication and public review, to me could be done in one standards and assessment committee meeting and then brought to the full board, which could speed things up. Otherwise, you're looking at 3 to 4 months for those 2 steps to occur, which is just standards sitting, waiting for people to see them. So that's an area that I would highly encourage the committee to consider combining. Not that we don't do those 2 steps, we just combine bringing them to committee, which really there's nothing that stops staff from doing that now, but just to be clear, is that okay? Kind of thing. And then 8, revision based on board direction, similar to what you've been doing now. We come to committee, goes to full board, we come back to the full board and the committee for their adoption. So you can just see everything takes a couple of months just because we've got to go through those iterations since committee meetings after full board. And then report implementation plan. I thought this could be part of 9. So here's the final standards. Here's also how we plan on implementing the standards, as that is the final step that could combine so it's done in August and June instead of waiting all the way to September. So implementation plan doesn't stop the standards from being released and people starting to work on them. It just makes sense, to close out the process. You don't need to see us another month. We can do both of those at the same time. So those are kind of my areas. If we combine, it shortens up the timeline. And so I'm going to stop talking and see what you think.
And I would love to hear if there's anybody in the audience that has input on this. They have thoughts either from local districts or, what about committee? What are you guys thinking or questions?
I for one, like your streamlining ideas. Okay. I think that's good. And then here where it says report revision recommendations and progress to the board with brief updates. I haven't gotten a whole lot out of that when they've come. And it's not required by board policy or by statute. So I don't know that step 5 is all that necessary.
Well, I would counter with that. I'd like just a little bit more detail on the meetings. How did they go? What are the process concerns that there is being seen? Just a standard overview, I don't think is helpful, right?
Well,
it becomes redundant
because they're really in process.
Yeah, right. So I'd like to know, what
give us.
Okay, well, what are they seeing? What are they, what has been easy? What has
kind of talked about not having them report what they're saying, right?
Yeah.
I'm just talking about general, and talking about how did the board meetings go? What was what was the majority concerns on, or what were they happy about, or all of that. So I would like to see more of that, and not just a general. We had this meeting and it went well. So I'm also speaking for board member Ellis and Bolcher and Earl. They would like to know more about, because we can't cover every single meeting. It's a public meeting. And especially when the science standards did the first time ever using the computer and the Zoom conferencing, right? How did that go? What was the details? It'd be good to know. I mean, knowledge is enlightening, and so just to understand that, it didn't work well. Well, what does that mean, right? Is it a different process needs to be enabled, or it was a complete fail, or
And I think he did talk about that. I think for me, when it's time for the public to comment, or when they're doing their work, I want them to do the work so that I want their words to be valued.
I'm not saying,
and I know that too, but it's almost like I want it without our interference. But I don't know how the rest of the committee feels about that.
Well, we're talking about two different things, aren't we?
We
number
are.
5 and number 7.
Lee's kind of skipped.
Yeah. With number 5, my main concern would be: is the revision group on target? Are they going to be able to finish this in the 6 months or whatever we've got on the calendar?
Is that too
that's
fast?
what I'd want to know. Is just is there things tracking, or are they running into stuff that's going to take them longer? And then on 7, I think that we did it the right way this last time, with just this is the number, this is the amount of comments we're getting, but not really directing the content.
But in terms of frequency, like Jennifer's asking, do you think once on step 5 or?
Well, I don't understand. I think they could come to the committee.
Yeah.
I don't know that they need to go to the full
I don't
board.
either.
No. Just to the committee, and maybe every 2 months, unless something's really going haywire. We just need to know if it's going to be 9 months instead of 6.
Maybe every other month. For me, it's like frequency. Do you want to?
So it would just be an information item.
An information item only.
So right now, the calendar you have laid out is a year and 9 months, basically. And if you do all the combinations that you're talking about, what does it get to?
About 13, 14 months. So you're trimming off. It's a much closer. Your writing committee may still take longer than the hopeful 6 months. Like we've been doing preschool standards for like 2 years
not
now.
graduating.
That's not your fault at all. That is honestly the writing committee. So in terms of there is some, but if we're coming to report every couple months, you would know like why is this not moving along? Like we would
I
expect
didn't even
in
know you're
normal
doing preschool standards.
2 years ago we started. And we just haven't had any of those things. So we'll come in.
I'm sure I did, but I'm just
update next month. How about that?
Just remembering.
Can you work on that?
Yep.
So what is the committee's feeling about combining? It sounds like, Scott, you're for kind of combining, streamlining that.
Yeah, I think we've got, unfortunately, our schedule really drags us out.
I think so too.
Bring it here, then it goes, we approve, it goes to the board the next month. It really, so the more
From a
that
teacher
we do, the
perspective,
better.
it's too long.
Could we leave this off the consent calendar so that board members on the board can also have a chance to review it, or do you want it on the consent?
Is that a motion?
So I think this is
but like is yours?
It's a general.
This is step 6 and 7, right?
Yeah, so 6 and 7.
So they don't.
We'd still do the steps, but we would do them different. It's the number 10 does have. We can either throw 10 on a consent calendar item, like as itself, or you can combine 9 and 10, and we would still come to the board for both of those.
Yeah.
They would just be done at the same time.
Yeah.
And
So-
talking
Yes, and in talking to staff, they feel that they already have their implementation plan ready before, because it's a pretty similar implementation plan. So to delay it is, considering that's not necessary. So they would have it ready usually by step number 9.
Okay.
So you can either, like my option there was consent calendar for 10, it just comes in on its own just to speed up the process in terms of it's one less month. Or you combine 9 and 10, and we still do both of them in a committee meeting and bring to full board. But that way you're shortening the time frame.
I would do. I would combine it.
Okay.
I'd love to combine as well.
Does someone want to make a motion on?
Can we go back to one that we did?
Yes.
We can just make a motion at the end as amended.
Okay. You guys are okay with that?
The consent calendar item for number 1, where the board the board chair picks the 7 members.
Yeah.
Is that okay as a consent calendar item that we?
I'm okay with that.
put that through. Okay.
Yeah, just clarify just as we're going through. So as amended means number 1 is a consent calendar item. Number 5 is frequency, and the question being answered is, does it take longer? Is there a holdup? Is there concerns that they need longer or something like that? So that's the goal of that, the outcome. And the other is combining steps 6 and 7 and combining steps 9 and 10.
I think also we talked on 5 about not going to the board but going to the committee.
And so that number 5 would be an information item only.
To the committee, not to the board.
And then under the number 1 on the details, can we put something like requires the board chair to appoint 7 members with specific background to compose the writing committee?
This is the standards review committee, but yes, I can definitely add that.
To compose the standards review.
Yeah.
Was there anything else captured?
Requires board chair to 7 members.
So there's 5 from the House, 5 from the Senate, and 7 from the board chair that make up the standards revision committee. I just put the stuff for the board.
Yeah. It's a huge. I just know that Nora Lee's going to have to write up these minutes, and if we're
and I got it, Nora Lee, too. I wrote it down too. Oh, Nora Lee, you're magic.
Even with your recorder.
If she knows when the standards review committee is meeting and what time and on what day, that's amazing.
I know, right? So yeah,
that's true.
Would you like a revised
specific? Because parents may not have a specific background in that subject, but they may have. It
comes from the legislation. So in terms of that, the board chair really gets to decide what specific means. And it might. Most people think of it as like making sure you get diverse perspectives on the committee.
So not a specialist in that.
No.
It actually, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, with those amendments, which we all have listed, we're looking for an action to consider changes to the standard revision process.
I'll move we revise the standards revision process with the changes and amendments that have been discussed by the committee today.
Okay. The motion before the committee is to consider changes to the standard revision process, including the amendments that we have discussed today, and if we need those listed. But I think, Nora Lee, you have them.
Yeah, most of them, yeah.
And Jennifer will have an updated.
Together we can.
You got that? Okay, and I've got them listed too.
An updated version.
And then we'll put an updated version.
Number 5 is frequency, and then information.
And frequency, we're going every 2 months.
And it's an information.
In 2 months.
To the committee.
And information only to the committee.
Only to the committee, good.
And then number 6 and 7 is combined, and then 9 and 10 is combined.
So is that 2 months, and then if there's an emergency, 2 months and as needed or something?
Right. If you can always call us, or they're like, oh, there's something you should know, we can come. But in terms of the required frequency,
2 months.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for handling my brain on paper.
I love your brain on paper. We got to take a vote. So hold that thought. I mean, you can do what you want. Any discussion to the motion? That very long motion. Okay.
I'm still concerned. I don't know. I'm not sitting right now, so I'm going to vote no. After hearing, does this any way conflict with the CBE discussion that we had this morning?
Personalized learning?
Yeah.
No. This is truly your process already. We're honestly just trimming by combining some elements.
Okay, I'm just reading the heading, and so I'm thinking.
This is just all the language at the top is language from the legislation.
Okay.
Like, it's not Jennifer language. Let me let you know.
It should be.
Yeah. No, I'm just.
I get what you're saying in terms of personalized and grade levels.
It's a two-step process. One is the board's role in establishing the core standards.
Yes.
The second is developing the masteries that go along with those standards, setting the competencies and.
But if the masteries are then defined at the LEA level, is there a conflict of interest? Is there a conflict there?
This would be a step 1 no matter what.
Okay.
So this initial step has to take place.
Just trying to clarify.
Yeah. That's a great question. Then there's the next step.
I love that you're thinking about personalized learning.
I know.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Go fix this up for me.
Okay, Jennifer, I already do it at my house, so.
You feel like I get personalized.
I do very much.
Not everyone does. So.
Okay, Okay, our next action item is 6.4, the 2019-2020 Standard Test Administration and Testing Ethics Policy. And Jared, you're filling in for Darren.
I'm filling in, yeah.
All right.
How is Darren doing?
Just to be clear, he's at a graduation
I was going to say,
today for his son. It's not because of anything.
There's no disaster.
Yeah. He went out and visited some schools and felt much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
He said there wasn't as much crisis.
Okay, so I know there's some changes because of House Bill 119 and some things. Go ahead and update us on.
Okay. Just a reminder, Jared Wright, Test Administration Coordinator. So we can just walk through it. So obviously the date, just plugged it in here. If it was on track, that would change depending on. No changes on that first page, even though it says page 2. I noticed some fixes there. So on page, we'll go with on the second page, even though it says 3.
Just tell us the name of it.
I love that the links work, though.
I know.
It's great.
Oh, good. You never know. Go through them enough. Okay, so under the during testing section, removed the. We'll talk more about this, but this was removed because of the change with HB 118, and so that'll show up at a later point. So we removed it from here, so we're not redundant. In that same during testing section down where it says licensed Utah educators shall ensure that, the 5th bullet point down, students aren't, and we clarified the term reward or rewarded to provide it a non-academic reward. And I think, so we have a couple things. We have other things that this kind of plays off. One is the statute, but we also have the board rule that will be coming at some point as well. And so I think these will all be incorporated. But that's the addition there that we wanted to clarify. The next page, after testing, this is where the new information came. So we included it as a section, Utah LEAs and licensed Utah educators may, and then I just pulled this from HB 118. Just that they can use the student score to improve the student's academic grade or demonstrate the student's competency. And that's where that demonstrate competency comes back in. And then we removed that demonstration or the using the score because it's not as accurate if we include the information prior. And then just the state required assessment, I just took out required just to kind of be consistent because we say state assessment throughout the document. And I think that is all the changes we made here. Any questions, comments?
Lisa?
So I'm already hearing teachers use this HB 118 already in the classroom when it's not supposed to be implemented until after May 15th. Mm-hmm. So we already have problems there.
It could be because they're using 404 if they had students opt in.
Well, the law still needs to be enacted.
But our board rule, like they could have been doing that because of board rule.
Because the rule changed.
Yeah, because the rule changed.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, because I know that I used it this year because of the rule change, but I had my students opt in. The bill says you have to opt in. So.
Okay. The second part is competency within in a relevant course. I'm also hearing that they're using it to replace a full grade. And not just have it be extra credit or display competency, but to actually replace the grade of a student, like for a quarter or for the school year. So should we be clear that is that implied in 118, Or
Well,
can
I
we be
just took
clear?
it right
I was
from
going to say,
there.
I think
So
that comes
this
right
is
from the 118.
this
Right.
is the text.
Yeah,
So
and
I'm
it's
not
the
sure,
rules.
but you're saying be more clear
I
here.
think we need to be more clear that it's not to replace a grade. It can enhance it, right, or show competency of the subject, but
this is based on both the rule and the law. So if we want changes, we would have to go to change that, not the testing manual. And we're going to be revisiting 404 probably in a couple of months, which we could address it then, but this has to reflect both the rule and the law.
But we haven't written the rule yet.
No, the rule is written. It's in 404.
It's in 404.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And the law is written.
Well,
I guess what I'm saying is that I don't know that we can change this without first changing the law, which.
But the law is not stating to change the full grade. It says it's an extra credit, right?
It doesn't.
Right, but in our rule we say
academic
competency.
reward, doesn't it?
Portion of the student's
Yeah. And our rule says a competency. Honestly, I don't. Teachers could do it, so.
It says an LEA may consider, and this is in RG 77404-6,
Mm-hmm.
an LEA may consider as one of multiple lines of evidence a student's score on a state-required assessment to determine whether a student may enroll. So
one of many, and then down further it says.
One of many. It
based
doesn't
on
have to be
student's
just.
score.
No,
Yeah.
we debated that.
Right.
In standards.
No, I remember that
because you were
discussion.
there.
Mhm.
And then later on it says to replace a competency.
Okay.
But that is something we could debate when 404 comes back.
I was going to say 404 hasn't been updated, so
No, and that will be
Right.
coming back.
And that's what I'm saying. It hasn't. Yeah, that is correct. So,
which the other option is to wait and approve this till after we do.
I would almost wait.
Oh, we can wait if we want to.
Yeah, I don't think it's time sensitive right at this point, is it?
Say that
Is this time sensitive?
I think that we wanted to.
Well, this is for next year.
It's for next year.
So maybe we
So if
should
we
wait
can
until the rule's updated.
get it before the school year. That's when we hear. But
So if we don't, but then the problem is.
You don't meet again until August.
Yeah, and we want it before August. So we probably should approve this, and then if we need to make other changes.
Then we
can do
way.
it. Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
And just one addition on that thought. One thing we do with this is to create some additional helps and documents, whether it's a PowerPoint or something like. And so exactly.
Yeah.
So if we have this, then we can go forward and maybe clarify if needed, or when that 404 is approved, add some of that additional help and training in that. So just a thought.
Yeah. The only thing I want to add before more discussion or motion is made is, it might seem silly, but we had talked in standards how students who are opted out, they can also be in the same room as kids who are testing.
That's right.
And if you make a motion, I would like to add that insertion. I would like to put that in during testing. So I guess I'll make a motion to amend the document to add a line in during testing that says students who are opted out may reside, whatever, in the same room as those who are testing. I mean, I trust you. Remain. Thank you.
And that is in 404, so I could just take that same language.
Yes, whatever the language is in 404. It's just, it's weird, but that's kind of a question I get a lot of, and it's weirdly helpful to teachers not to have to find a place to put students when and student safety and, somebody's there monitoring. So I would just want to add that.
Okay. Second that.
Okay. Oh, yes. All those in favor? I mean, is there any discussion?
I'm in favor.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Back to, we need an original motion or a main motion.
I would move that we would approve the standard test administration and testing ethics policy as amended and send it to the full board for approval.
Okay. So the motion before the board is to recommend the Standards and Assessment Committee review testing ethics. Okay. And approve the 2019-2020 Standard Test Administration and Testing Ethics Policy Review policy as amended. Sorry, that was a mouthful. Any discussion to that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Thank you,
Jared.
Thank you.
Okay, are you guys good without a break to finish our last two, or does anyone need a break?
Let's go for it.
Okay, 6.5, college and career awareness. We have Talia and Ashley again, and never mind. Who is Talia? Who is she?
I made her mad.
Okay. So with this one, we want to approve the college and career awareness course standards. They've been out for 30-day public review.
We're on day 29.
Day 29. Okay, they've been out for 29-day public review. We've got one more day left, everyone.
Yep.
Ashley, go ahead and talk to us about this.
Again, I'm Ashley Higgs. I'm the CTE Education Specialist. So we are on day 29 of the 30-day public comment for college and career awareness. After last board meeting, notice went out, direct notice went out to LEA heads, LEA business administrators, LEA public information officers, USBE employees, Utah senators and representatives, all education and communication personnel in the governor's office and legislative offices, daily media. It was added to daily media in Utah, UEA, AFT, Utah School Employees Association, CCSSO, NASB, Utah PTA, this College and Career Awareness Listserv, and then the LEA CTE directors. With that, we received minimal comment. We did receive comment, how would you like, majority of it was positive. We did have some that wanted changes. How would you like us to go about with those changes? Or recommendations, I should say.
Do we have those recommendations? Do we?
I can pop it up.
So we do. I've had a conversation. We received a set of comments from one of the board members. Sorry, Talia Longhurst.
Oh, I thought Talia
Director of
was
Career.
Who is Talia?
Trust Ashley to hold me to the line.
Yeah, you did that on purpose.
She did. So we did receive public comment from a board member. I've reviewed that comment with the board member. Ashley and I sat down this afternoon and made some changes to the existing document to try and integrate some of the feedback that we got. Would you like to look at that? Or would you
as a committee, do you guys want to see that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there any other public comment that asked for changes?
No.
So we just
This
had
is
one comment. Okay.
Okay. So let me pull this boy up. Oops.
That seems like it's so far. Maybe I'm just old.
What? Oh, so far.
That's so far down there.
If I may just summarize some of the thoughts that the board member had. There were a couple of areas where she recommended that we were a little more concise and not so wordy, and so we've taken that into account and made a few changes in that direction. She also recommended some additional verbiage be included about teaching students about, as we're learning about college and career awareness and making plans for post-secondary education, that there's a little bit of education that happens around college debt. And so we've made some inclusions there. They get that information in general financial literacy. Yeah. This is a little bit earlier in the process for them, but we thought it was worthy inclusion. It's never too early.
Like in the trillions right now?
Do you want to see the comments, or do you want to see our revisions?
I would just do the general, just the revisions, what you guys did.
Okay. And then the other thing that we talked about was, and in my time, we revise these core standards every so often, and each time we do, I think the same concern comes up, and we're able to talk about it and hopefully allay some concerns about it. 7th and 8th grade is not a time when we're asking kids to commit to a career, right? No. And so you'll see things in the standards like create a plan. We want them to understand the process for how to create that plan. They may go home and throw that away and never even look at it again, but they now have the skills and abilities, know where to go find legal market information, post-secondary education information, and find that so that when they're ready to be serious about it, they know how to do it. And so we talked about that with the board member yesterday and tried to make sure that she understood that is not the goal of this course. We are not asking students to sign in blood for, So this is exploring. That is the goal of this class.
I actually liked what Juab had to say about making a rolling 4-year plan, and with the idea that it was going to be changing.
Well,
to give someone some direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so if that's the idea behind it.
And I will also add. I will also add quickly that part of my personal goal, and Ashley I know shares the same opinion, which is we want kids to come out of this class knowing what they like, what they're interested in, as well as what they don't like.
Good.
So, every time I always ask teachers, what's the purpose of this course? And I get there like, oh, know what a pathway is, and I go, no, there should be certain things. A kid should know what it is they want to do and the direction they need to go to do it. They need to figure out what it is they don't want to do and figure out what interests they have. And that's the whole purpose of this. So in this document, the items that are in red were the comments the changes that we took from the feedback and implemented into this. So under Strand 1, Standard 1, we added the bullet. So this bullet was actually its own standard in Standard 1, its own strand in Standard 1. And so we just replaced it because we saw it fits in here, and then we could take out a standard. So that was that first comment.
Will you read it just for those who can't see?
That's all.
I can see it because I have my glasses.
I don't have a copy yet.
Okay.
We literally did this morning. So, Standard 1 says assess and apply personal interests, skills, aptitudes, and abilities to education planning and future career decisions.
I think you just need to read that.
And then the bullet that we added was investigate career choices in relation to aspirations and lifestyle choices. Example, identify lifestyle goals, identify career salaries and required education and training, explore how lifestyles, expectations, values, and attitudes affect career decision making.
So it's just
we took Standard 6 and moved it up.
Yep.
Okay,
and
so
then
it's
did away
exactly
with
that.
Yes, it's exactly right.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. The next was so then here's
So
I
Standard 6
scratched,
is gone.
cross that out. Then change Standard 7 to Standard 6. Standard 2, there was no
Strand 2
or Strand 2, yes. Strand 2, there was no changes. Strand 3, there was no changes. Strand 4, we changed the strand to read: students will create a plan of study that leads to rigorous course taking patterns, develop, practice, and demonstrate stress management and general financial literacy skills to achieve future academic, life, and career goals. And this strand aligns to Board Rule R277462, which is the counseling, which counselors have to do. So this course is integrated with counselors. How we developed it is Strand 4 is what's required of counselors. So counselors will still be going into the class. They'll still be teaching lessons such as the stress management. They'll be teaching the financial portion, creating the 4-year plan so that as a student is going through their education, instead of going to the counselors and saying, well, I don't know what it is I want to do, this is giving them an idea of, hey, here's my options, and we've aligned it so that they can look at it as a region instead of a state, and they can see what's available to them at their secondary schools and what's available to them at their tech colleges and things like that, so that they're going in saying, this is what I want, how can I get it, instead of going in saying, I don't know, type thing. And then Standard 1, we took out the last bullet that says discuss the key terms and processes related to college affordability, scholarships, and financial aid. And we moved that to Standard 3, which was the standard, the comments wanted to include understanding the financial needs and risks.
It's a whole new standard.
So it's a whole new standard. So Strand 4 used to be 2 standards. It's now 3. So Standard 3 is students will explore various financial needs and risks associated with the cost of different education programs. Discuss the key terms and processes related to college affordability, scholarships, and financial aid. So that was what was taken out of Standard 1, Explore ways to avoid student loan debt, including opportunities to obtain course credits and program skills while in high school. Discuss the long-term impact of student loan debt on future earning potential. Let's spell earning right today. Self-sufficiency and personal relationships. And then the other standard that...
if I may, what is personal relationships?
Discuss the long-term impact of student loan debt on future earning potential, self-sufficiency, and personal relationships. So I'm going to assume
on marriage and
it could be
family
that.
burden.
So I didn't write this. This was there, so that's what I would assume it is, but I would have to ask them for clarification.
Do you want to marry someone hundreds of
I-
thousands of dollars of school loan?
People do all the time, and right now, I'm gonna bite my tongue.
Can I ask, is this a burden on these teachers? Like, is this something else to be added that they haven't been trained in? I mean, I know it's kind of already there. I just don't want to. Is it one more thing for the teachers to be in charge of teaching when they already have a full course?
So
that's my question.
When I had the committee come and we were deciding on it, so technically how this is set up is strands 1 through 3 is what's the responsibility of the teacher.
Okay.
Strand 4 is the counselor's responsibility.
Right.
So that a teacher could come and sit with their counselor or counselors at their school and say, so this is what I need you to teach, and it gives them more feedback. So in the past, we had the career development application lessons, which were CDAs, which were set-alone lessons that basically covered this information. Feedback from teachers is they didn't like that setup because they had a script that they had to teach certain CDAs during a certain semester quarter, whereas they felt like if they were in the middle of a project and then it's like, oh, hey, today we're going to start talking about financial aid, and it had nothing to do with what they were doing. It was kind of a one and done, where what we did is we've incorporated all of those CDAs into the standards so that it's taught throughout the course instead of just a checkbox of, okay, I did CDA 1, and then it had no, and students would be like, well, what?
So you feel like this
yes,
is...
Yes, and teachers wanted that. That was one of the big things is they're like, can we, because then teachers were like, well, could we teach all of the CDAs at the beginning? And we're like, well, no, because then if you have someone that comes in, and so that's why we wanted to integrate it into the whole entire course, instead of like a one and done lesson type
But
thing.
then up above there was financial literacy. That kind of worries me too. If
so, the
do we need that
that's
again?
Too early.
Do we need that again?
It's
just covered in 3.
It just summarizes the,
okay,
the
that's
strand
right.
for the standard.
So the strand 4. Okay, thank you.
You know what I don't like about it is that it seems to focus on college. And if we're trying to get them to look at all different trades and all kinds of things, that one section, it talks about college debt. It really kind of emphasizes college, and it seems to kind of move them that way, even though...
So in Strand 1, standards, 6, but previously 7, we talk about post-secondary and training opportunities, and then we identify post-secondary and industry education.
Yeah, but I'm talking about 5 specifically. Look at 5 specifically, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
5?
That's what came down to read it.
Strand 2.
The last one that you were doing with the financial section. Look at how it really focuses on college debt, student loan debt.
So if we change college to post-secondary education,
secondary education, affordability, scholarships, financial aid.
Yeah. So instead of it saying related to college, we say post-secondary education.
I know that there's a lot of people who are really wanting us to emphasize trades more, and so I don't want it to seem like we're kind of CTE.
It fits with CTE too.
Yeah.
Okay, good catch. Yeah.
So that's what that was.
Can I ask about? So I just came from a STEM, committee meeting. I wonder how STEM fits into this, where we're talking about rigorous coursework and that sort of thing. Are we actively telling kids that if you don't take math, if you don't do this, then this portion of your potential career opportunities is eliminated? How does that fit into this? It doesn't say STEM anywhere in the document, but how does that fit?
So realigning from what the current standards are to now is that the current standards were divided by content area. So you had agriculture, you had business and marketing. This is now focused onto the national career clusters, and in standard 3, Strand 1, Standard 3, we talk about the career clusters and pathways. So these are nationally known, but these are the ones that are high demand, high skilled jobs in Utah, because obviously we want them to stay in Utah. And the other thing is that careers aren't siloed anymore. Like if I want to be a culinary arts person, I need to know chemistry, I need to know the science and things that will affect my food. If I want to do fashion design, I'm needing to know IT because you have fabrics that are changing colors, you have them lighting up for ugly Christmas sweater parties, things like that. And so
that's important.
Yeah, exactly. And so we didn't want to divide it out like it was in the current things. And so we're really focusing on this being a simulation and a project-based course where it's, here's the problem, how are you going to fix it? And then discussing the careers that fall under that. And so with taking out, because I know like in the previous, the current standards, it talks about, okay, what are STEM careers? And I mean, you look at this and you have engineering and technology, you have your IT, you have that fall under that, as well as we talk about the career clusters and the career pathways, all of those are having, all of the pathways have, what's the word I'm looking for? Like Math 1050 and academic, thank you. The academic courses, not just CTE courses. Because a lot of times we have this notion that academics is fighting with CTE, and that's not really it's intertwined.
So I think that's covered. I just saw the part that said making career choices based on their things they like and stuff like that. And a lot of them are not going to say they like math and science.
So they intentionally added the term rigorous.
Where it says rigorous coursework, rigorous course-taking patterns.
Yep. So when we first had this, we just had coursework. And the committee's like, but we don't want them to just take coursework. We want them to take things that are rigorous and that are going to challenge them so that when they enter that workforce, that they understand, like, hey, it's not just, here's the problem, here's the solution, now go do it. It's they have to have the critical thinking skills. They have to be able to collaborate that thing.
And they could see the reward for taking that rigorous coursework through this. Okay.
Linda had a couple of...
just a couple of questions. It could just, I'm open to whatever you guys think. But it doesn't talk a lot about proper dress. And so I'm wondering if that's something that we should...
So what?
Like professionalism.
Proper dress for whatever career you're going to, or even for job interviews and those kinds of things.
Dress and appearance too.
Yeah, I think
too.
So, one thing I will say, I'm going to go up to standard 1, Strand 1, standard 1, sorry. The very last bullet, it talks about integrating job-seeking skills. In the current standards, it was they wanted kids to create resumes. And one of the things where it is that is a complete waste of time because a 7th or 8th grader does not have a resume. So we're having them create a resume that doesn't make anything. And so what we wanted, we thought it was still important, but what we looked at is we wanted them to evaluate and revise resumes and looking at resumes and saying, hey, would this be a good resume or would it not? And so it kind of gives them that idea of what I should include in my resume. We also had participate in mock interviews and so that they could understand that process. So I think it would fall under that.
Can we talk about not having 1-inch gauges in the ears either?
But wouldn't that fall in the local curriculum?
Yeah.
I mean, really.
That's Linda just mentioned.
Yeah, Linda just mentioned that.
It's just a...
So you keep it general so that the local
because let's be honest, if you, so when I was teaching at middle school, we had a parent that was a tattoo artist that came in and talked. And it was more of the art things and stuff like that. And the thing I took out of it was don't get my girls' ears pierced before 5 because they could have reactions to it and stuff like that. And so even though it was a total out of the box, like I'm not gonna ever tell my kid to be a tattoo artist, but there's kids that are interested in it, and we don't want to.
Well, no, I'm not saying that you can't dress that. I'm saying proper dress for whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, and I think that falls under this job-seeking skills and.
Also under that same one, most people get their jobs, they say 70 to 85% through how? Networking. And so I think networking is, we put it very minimally there. And so I think networking needs to be,
I'm wondering,
it needs to be kind of,
what if we do something with communication? Because I feel like that's
and I think even introducing them, they're social media savvy. They can look at LinkedIn, right?
Well,
and those kinds of things, and look at
networks.
And we did
online
discuss how technology is used to communicate. So we have social media and things like that. But we could add, I think, if we added networking under communication.
I think that's good because I think it's
Isn't that what it is,
something
though?
that they need
Evaluate
to
career
know.
networks?
Kids go out there with applications and then they never get hired and they can't figure out why. Well, it's because kids are getting hired by people who know.
Yeah.
All right.
So would you just add that as parentheses in web conferencing, networking, email?
Yeah, web conferencing, email, social media, networking.
That would be easy to change.
So those are the only things I when I read through it that popped out to me a little bit.
Anything else?
Just trying to think. 8th grade is 13, 14?
13, 14.
And technically, a 14-year-old can get a job at a district school and help. Right? Sweep and stuff. So I'm just thinking how early this is applicable to them.
But it's all about practice. I mean,
and that's one thing is that in Strand 2, when we're talking about the workplace skills, it says students will develop, practice, and demonstrate.
So this is an exploration course.
Yes.
Developmentally appropriate for exploration. And
anything else from either people in the audience or committee members or? Okay, we are looking for a motion to approve the College and Career Awareness Course Standards.
As amended.
As amended. Okay, so the motion before the committee is to approve the College and Career Awareness Course Standards as amended. Is there any discussion to that motion?
So I am going to vote no on this. I learned about this, back in 2010 when they were talking about Common Core and the way it was supposed to be mandated, and even with the Dear Hillary letter back in '92, how it was moving kids to a college and career timeline. And they already do this in Europe, and I met a principal that is now a principal of a charter school in my district, and he was actually teaching in Europe, and he saw this in practice, and where you start a pathway and based on social emotional behavior and other data that is required through assessments, a path is determined for that child. Now in Europe, in some places you can't change. In some places you can. And I know that Texas is now doing it in 8th grade, where they're starting on this trajectory path, and it's not mandatory yet that you stick to that and you have options to change out of it, but I'm concerned that it's headed in that direction. It's like the slow moving, that's you, slow moving socialism coming in of line upon line, moving towards more mandatory practice in the legislature. And I can't be for this. I can't be for this. I fought against it for 10 years. And so I'm going to vote no, because it just moves along with the ESSA. It moves along with the trajectory from the Mark Tucker, Dear Hillary letter all the way through. I have to vote no on this, so I'm going to say no.
Any other discussion? Okay, the motion before the committee is to approve the College and Career Awareness Course Standards as amended and send to the full board for approval. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
We will send draft 2. We'll finalize it, send draft 2 to Norley, so it will be in your document.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
You guys
have a good weekend.
You have a better weekend.
Hey, if it's sunny.
Yeah. Okay. Hey guys, we have one more. Except we might need Patty. So let's take a 5-minute break. Oh no, are you? Do it. Okay, good. So board policy.
Here.
Woo! Action item 6.6. Did you get a hold of them?
No, they called up 4 times.
Okay. So this is the School Safety Advisory Commission, and I believe Jeff's not here. Patty, you're not talking about it, but
Jeff's still in.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, yeah, Jeff and I were working on 464 and this together.
Okay.
They're currently talking about 464,
Okay.
so I run over
thank
here,
you so much.
We divide it up.
Well, it's nice we have a lot of experts.
So, this change that you have before you on the School Safety Advisory Committee is actually your recommendation.
Yeah.
So, the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel that meets quarterly, that I facilitate, that is one of your official board advisory committees, made the recommendation to you 2 months ago to consider the school mental health, the mental health needs of students with disabilities, and specifically the safety needs of students with disabilities and the professional development needs of the educators that work with students with disabilities in order to ensure mental health and safety. So when the advisory panel submitted that official recommendation to you 2 months ago, your recommendation back to us as staff was to incorporate the key concepts of that UC, which is what we call the panel, UC recommendation into the Board Policy 5009 School Safety Advisory Commission. So the language that you see in blue in the commission, clear down on page 1. Okay, so 6, duties 6. Prioritize methods to improve students for services for students with disabilities. That is the language that Jeff wrote to pull out of the advisory panel's recommendations to you. So that's exactly what this is incorporating the advisory panel's recommendations.
So we have the right people on this committee to address this, right? We've got people from Health and Human Services, Juvenile Justice,
yes, this is
mental health professionals.
It's an awesome committee.
Yeah. We also have the fire department and all those other folks who maybe aren't quite as...
It is such a cool.
Everyone else was already included. You already had them.
And understand what they're talking about. May I also have you look at 5B? And on 5B, the SSAC may add to the voting membership of the commission with a 2/3 majority vote and consent of the board. So if there's an additional voice that needs to be heard on the committee, then during that time, even though it's not stated as one of the members in this commission, then they can add that afterwards by a 2/3 majority vote.
Yeah, I really like that.
Can I also add, please?
No, I'm just kind of wondering out loud if we expand the scope of this to where it's too much, or it might be better to have a more focused committee on mental health and just keep expanding this to where we're talking about, active shooters and all this other stuff, fire safety.
It's just, I think it's really critical. I mean, I don't know what you guys think.
We're at a point, we're headed this direction. I'm just wondering,
I see
make
what
a
you're
committee
saying.
to handle everything that has to do with everything's concerned with safety, right?
Yeah, that's
food poisoning.
You're right.
We can keep
it
going.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, and
transportation. Yeah,
right.
It handles it all.
And speaking to that, I think that was the original intent and purpose of this committee, is the fact that all of these were individual things that were happening. So right now, when you see someone right there, and for example, if it says the Sheriff's Department, the purpose is supposed to be that they are supposed to then have there's a subcommittee, and there's actually a list of each one of those subcommittees. So when you're saying there's too many, there are, but each one of those is supposed to be a subcommittee. We have found that it wasn't working properly, and so we've added some more communication things that need to occur. So after each meeting, then there's notes, and then those will be posted, and there's a website that's being created. So the original implementation is not going smoothly. We got that feedback. We have Anna Thomas here, and she can speak to that there was not great communication. It didn't work as intended, right? Yeah, and so really, and are all the voices being heard? So I think that exactly what you're stating, the thing that was going wrong, and the purpose why the committee to get together is parallel work, or actually things that opposed each other in communication rollout or plans that need to happen within schools. One thing was happening for the fire department, it was different within a school. Risk management was different from here to there. And so bringing the entities together to be able to update and come up with common goals and plans So what we need to get better at, or the committee needs to get better at, is doing the subcommittee work, bringing those voices to the full committee to assure that alignment of effort and voice. So exactly what you're stating was something that was a concern that was brought a couple of months ago, and so then more efforts are starting to be made in that accordance. We had the legislative session in between where we couldn't implement a lot of that yet, and so now that's kind of what is being concentrated on. So you actually make a great point. It's currently being addressed.
Because we tried to add more, and then we realized we were getting too big, and then we focused on the communication aspect. And then I like that they can add with a vote. Leah, you had more to add.
Could I just add? So Janelle Locke, who is the chair of UC, and Karen Condor, who is the vice chair of UC, were both intending to be here. They were hoping that you'd go a little bit longer.
We don't do that.
We don't really want to. So you beat them.
We're always really quick.
You beat them both to the punch, but they both wanted to be here. And Karen just texted me and said she's online because she couldn't get here in time. But they both wanted you to know they were so grateful that you considered their recommendations, that you are considering incorporating their recommendations into this committee. So.
Oh, Anna, do you want to speak?
Always.
Come on up, would you?
But I'll say, to your point, I think one of the reasons that there needed to be that explicit mention of mental health and disability wasn't because the intent of this committee is to solve those issues in schools. It's to make sure that the recommendations that come out of this committee are aware of the implications for that specific population. Because the legislation that sort of originated from this committee last time around, I think that there could have been another level of review about who would have been most impacted. So if you come up with a way of dealing with a school shooter that means identifying everyone who behaves strangely, it's going to include a lot of kids with special education needs inappropriately and unfairly. And so picking apart those things, I think, is really important to make sure you have a policy that is going to do what you want it to do, which is catch like things that are actually threatening and not people that are perceived as threatening. So I think that's really important. And I had a quick question about this commission. And I know like the easiest thing is for it to get really, really big, but in what way is its work connected to the folks who are in charge of the Safe UT app?
Oh, I keep looking for Christy. It's not connected, but we do have Barry Rose, who is on the commission as well, and we have that exchange of information. And so then we've also been talking about meaning communication. So exchange of information via communication. So they're aware of the work that the commission is doing, and then we've had conversations that you saw most recently about what the app could do. And I don't know, Jeff, if you have more information on that.
He came to us.
Yeah, okay. And he presented in it, and so there's always the people that come to present and give more information on that. That also speaks to the alignment of effort and the parallel work being done. So
that's what I was curious about. It seemed like they had really pushed ahead with some of at least the collection of concerns at the school level, and to have that as a continuous feeding mechanism just makes sense since it's already been very successful.
Any other questions? Oh, Sarah, you want to? Or Sarah, come on up. Or stay
the right
there.
time.
Now would be good.
Okay. It's kind of Sarah Jones with UEA. Along the same line of what Anna said, we do continue to have some concerns with this advisory committee based on the fact that proposed legislation came out in 2019 that, again, maybe didn't reflect everybody that Anna described and kind of the perspectives of how it might impact certain student populations. There were also assumptions about employees in that legislation. And I spent countless hours with Representative Ward clarifying things, and also with your own staff, who I met with numerous times as well. They were very helpful to say, on this House Bill 120, here's the impact that was never discussed about the impact on employees. Human resource law, and all of that was changed by the last version. But just as there are some gaps with maybe student populations on this council, because the way this committee is so unique, it does create a concern. If you look online, purpose and background, number 1, sub-item number 4, that the purpose of this committee is to provide feedback and consideration to the legislature, not to the board, to be reviewed at a committee level, to then be vetted, to then have public input, but to circumvent that and go straight to the legislature. And because on line, where's the section? Under section 3 meetings, subsection 3, the meetings are not subject to the Open Public Meetings Act. All of the concerns we had about House Bill 120 could not have been dealt with in advance, but had to wait till the bill was public, had to wait until it was gone to a committee hearing, had to meet with the representative. I think it confused him that there was this perception that there was stakeholder input kind of broadly writ from the Education Committee because this had come out of this council, kind of had a stamp of approval, but there wasn't any public input available. So my concern is not so much with the work they do, it's the process for input. And if you have a closed meeting and it can go straight to the legislature for recommendations, I don't know where we engage, where the public engages. And if there's no employee perspective or perspective, there's not a teacher on the panel, there's not a paraeducator, there's not a principal. All the people who actually interact with students on a daily basis, there's nobody represented on that committee right now. So the last time this was discussed in November or December, I didn't realize this committee was actually still meeting and going forward because we do have concerns that I don't even know how to engage on the conversations that are going to be driving policy. So,
and I think our hope, and maybe Patty can step in or Linda, they're on there, the hope was that these subcommittees, they would be communicating and you would get input there, and that's the channel of input. Because we were worried about broadening, but it also allows them to vote to add another member with a 2/3, I think, majority. I don't know if you guys want to add to that. Or Jeff?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I did just want to make the committee aware, and I've talked to Michelle Buse about this, and we're working out legal interpretation, but one thing we do need to be mindful of is if we have a commission that is voting to create legislation and going to the legislature with that decision, there is a question of whether or not you can actually have a closed meeting because you probably should be getting public input.
Yeah.
So one suggestion could be amending that line to state that it would be making legislative recommendations to the board, that the board would then officially approve through their regular process.
I thought that was the intent because we went through this. Yeah.
And if that's just something I would suggest as a possible amendment as you move forward in your discussion today, like that particular piece.
I'm not sure how soon this needs to be approved. I think that maybe we should take this to the commission and let them give input.
It's not ready yet.
Yeah, so let them give input on these changes as well. So, yeah, that's just.
So the reason for the closed meeting was because we're talking about plans to, reaction plans to things and stuff like that, right?
That's right.
And that can't be open. So they probably, if they're going to keep going the way they do, they need to open meetings except for when they go into some sort of executive session to talk about that stuff. Or they need to bring it through a body that's going to...
Angie was the...
Yeah, the intent was, because we had this discussion, but the intent was to bring it through the body.
Well, and
it doesn't say that in the law.
No, it needs to be.
Angie came to our commission meeting. You guys weren't there for that. And kind of described what we could and couldn't do and should and shouldn't do as far as Open Public Meetings Act too. And so that was why the decision was made there. So, but I think this needs to go back to the commission for input as well. Because if we change it and then it goes to the commission, they go, well, that's not going to work. Yeah. So I would move that we would send this to the School Safety Advisory Commission for their input.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is to send board policy 5009 back to the School Safety Advisory Commission.
But for what input specifically? What are we asking
on
to do?
Open and public meetings and on employees or teacher input.
And I think just in general, how do you get input?
How do you
Isn't
get
that
input?
what your concern is, Sarah?
Well, yes,
And
but something
the
doesn't come out
changes,
fully
they haven't
formed
seen this
Right.
change either.
before there's a chance for input.
It's like you want
changes
input before there's a
for students with
decision.
disabilities.
Yes, I think the legislature assumes.
I'm not
there's
sure.
a
That was
chance.
what
She wants a seat at the table, basically,
well,
somehow, right?
uh,
A direct,
or a way to get
direct
input.
or indirect.
Not necessarily. If it's a closed meeting, I think we would like a seat at the table, so that there's not legislation that pops up that we are completely unaware of. Or there's the option that Jeff proposed, that any recommendation that comes out of this committee goes to a board committee. We have input there. There's a number of ways to do it, but right now, I'm left with, hey, here's proposed legislation. What do you think? Oh, we don't
Well,
like
that happens all the time, though, Sarah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see drafts until, they come out. Then they're public, too. I mean, there are things that we do.
The assumption was that this had the stamp of a committee that had stakeholder input. There was some stakeholder input, and it completely neglected an employee perspective. And that's all we cared about on the legislation. The other piece we didn't fight on. It was this employee piece. And that wasn't considered at all because we didn't see it until it was revealed.
But if this is done right, it should be going out to you. It should be
Right.
going out to people.
And
If it's
I
done
think the reason
correctly,
for that is
that's what the piece we got to work on.
Yeah, see, these guys would probably like a seat. Utah PTA has talked about having a seat. I mean, we
But
can't.
if the people on
we
the
can't expand.
it's about actually shaping the policy
Yes.
so that it's inclusive, equitable, and effective. It's not necessarily about having a seat at the table.
Right.
But if you're not even in the room for the conversation, there's no way to assess
Right.
whether the policy meets those criteria. So I would say, also, this legislation was sweeping the way it was initially written.
Yeah.
Every single school would have this kind of threat assessment team added. That's a big deal. And so, I know it's a pain to have a lot of people around the table, but if it means that we prevent the state from unintentionally implementing a policy that has a disproportionate impact on students with special education needs, it may be worth the annoying conversations that go into it earlier rather than later.
I've got 2 boys with special needs. Just so you know.
So you can
It's
appreciate
not like
that.
there's no voices at the table for kids with disabilities.
And I have special needs.
As we speak to a process and we speak to the number of voices at a table or how it's working. So prior to the legislative session, it wasn't working correctly. We didn't have the voices that needed. Our subcommittees weren't working as we intended. So with self-reflection and at your I don't know what I'm trying to say, but if we could have the subcommittees instead of relying on those that are in charge of each one. So right now we say that the sheriff's department will do this and they'll meet with the subcommittee. We'll have this person do this work and do the subcommittee. We have people that aren't in the education realm that are trying to coordinate another full group of individuals, sometimes 10 to the table, to get their voices heard. And so maybe what we can do is commit the work of staff to be able to get those meetings, to make sure the subgroup meetings are being conducted, and then be able to organize that piece so that it's being done in a common way, so that we're not relying on Terry Shoemaker to make sure that there's 10 people around a table and then to get that feedback. So there's consistency, because if it's through a survey or whatever it is, if one person here can coordinate the subcommittee effort and then make sure that they convene and get that feedback back to the central committee, then I think that'd be a huge step as to how it was being implemented before.
Because otherwise it's going to be disproportional. You don't know who's going to be getting the input.
So I appreciate the input you're trying to get through that process, Patty. So thank you. I mean, I think that will clarify things. But if this committee is making recommendations directly to the legislature, and my only voice has been in driving the policy filtered through, I don't know, Terry Shoemaker or whoever might be the liaison to the education committee, we might actually have different perspectives on what the right policy is. Right? A superintendent and a teacher might see things differently. And so I think the biggest concern is not so much whether we are assigned a seat at the table, although maybe that would be the way you want to go, but the fact that the committee can recommend to the legislature without the board having gone through its process feels out of line.
So can I ask, this is what we were discussing in Policy 1004 yesterday. This is why that policy needs to be determined before we decide on this policy.
But
and that's
also
why,
directly,
in the meantime, I think this could go back to the safety committee, get the safety committee input. I think 1004 will probably come to us. And
the safety committee could decide to add more voting.
Yes.
Has there been that discussion on the safety?
If I may, before we send this back, I would think we should look at Section 1, purpose and background. And I just clarify with Jeff, I thought this came from legislature, that the purpose was legislated. It's not. They just requested. So we have freedom to go in and change number 4, which is a place they can say they go directly to the legislature. And let's put a blue line in there that says they can't do that.
Can I ask though? But that's the question on the policy on commissions that we're talking about, that we asked to be referred back to committee, is what a commission does and whether it can go straight to the legislature or what it's going to do.
Yeah,
and that's what we asked, and we need to resolve that before we start working on these individual.
Well, there were a couple of questions that came up, right? Board members' role in those sort of things, whether we can be voting members.
Those things all need to be resolved before we start changing these individual advisory committees.
Oh, right now,
commissions.
I think we should shut that down right now, and then work on the other stuff and just push it through the board. If we have the freedom to do that, and it sounds like we do.
Do we?
And why
I'm not sure
put a lid on this?
Because I'm not sure that that's what. This commission is different, and that's why we were talking about policy 1004.
But we formed this commission.
No, the legislature formed this
commission. No, they asked us to form it.
They formed it at an interim study meeting, is my understanding. They said, we're putting, remember Terry Shoemaker said, they're going to put this one and this one and this one, we're all going to put it together, and you guys are going to be in charge of it. Right?
So that's what they said. They said, school board, you put the commission together,
it's
right?
all these outside entities, right?
But I don't think we want to change our board bylaws and everything, because we have a place where we serve on a particular committee or whatever by virtue of statute, and that's what this is.
But this is different. This is different than any other committee.
It falls into that much better than being a board advisory committee on which we have board members.
Yes, because do you guys have, Jeff, do you have clarification on this?
Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yes, and everyone is.
I was going to say,
is everyone correct?
Okay,
let's go
probably isn't helpful, but what Linda is saying is, Senator Milner, the chair of the committee, there were 4 different groups that were independently doing school safety something, right? And they all were requesting time on the interim agenda to present, and she was like, why are you not all on the same page? So she made a formal request that the state school board convene all the groups, create this commission, and come up with the recommendations. So that's where that came from. It was a request by the chair of the ad interim committee. But to Scott's point, it was never made law. It was never codified by the legislature either.
So if I could, if we were the ones that were put in charge of putting the committee together or the commission together and putting this into rule, then we can go back and change number 4 that says, because this says they provide feedback directly to the legislature. We put that in there when we created the rule, right? So we can change that and just put a stop to that for right now while we work out this other stuff.
Well, and to be clear, this has never been passed. Like, this isn't governing right now, right? We've never passed
and we're not working on legislation right now either.
Right.
But what I'm saying, do you guys understand what I'm saying? The overarching policy that determines what a commission is, what a advisory committee is, all of those things needs to be passed before we go in and start amending individual advisory committees and individual commissions. They all have their own set of resolutions that govern them. And so there's that, but the overarching policy needs to be amended so we know how to change these individual ones. Does that make sense? Because we go in and start changing them, and then we go and do the policy, and it changes, and then they're all going to change too.
Can I just to clarify? So they don't have, right now there's no policy governing this commission.
Correct.
Right.
Is that right?
They're just to add.
They're just doing what they want.
And so within this commission, it was actually asked by our legislature if we wanted to put it in statute. And then because they felt that it was, to that level of importance, so they asked the board if it should be put in statute. If it's put in statute, then the membership within it is also then decided legislatively.
Mm-hmm.
So it was decided by this group to just have it go through the board and have it be in board policy instead of having it statutorily created. So that is something that our board can change at any point as well. And so according to the legislature, and if I'm wrong at any point, I hope that someone will correct me, but in speaking to one of our senators, he spoke of the fact that if it's a commission, then it's representative of several different bodies within government making a central decision. So here's the difference we might want to consider. So it's not about who's wrong or right. This is something that we need to consider in moving forward with what Linda's speaking about. Is it a commission? Is it an ad hoc? Is it a task force? What is it? If it's a commission, then it does go directly to the legislature. There's not because it doesn't make sense, though I'm just going to throw this in full transparency, it wouldn't make sense of having a group of entities that are separate that have to go through one entity to say if it's okay to go back to the legislature, which is why the commission, Linda, that makes group of entities not have to go through a central board to say if that's okay or not to report directly to the legislature. So I think what everyone's saying, and Jeff is correct, is everyone's right now, because but we have to decide what our order of operations is going to be. So I think that's what you're speaking to right now. Order of operations, chicken, egg, what are we going to do
So
first?
I'm on board with what Linda's saying. I actually spoke in favor of that yesterday because I think we do need to get this lined up so we can tell what groups are and what their responsibilities are. But what's the danger of not taking any action on this, which right now there's an outlet that goes straight to the legislature? Is that something that we want to put on hold until we get things worked out internally? I think
that's why my motion is to send it back to this committee so that they can give input, and then we wouldn't take any action on it. And then they could just look at it, go, okay, well, this looks good to us because that's what we did last time.
But will there be anything done if it goes back?
So it won't be done. Yeah. No, they would just send us say.
Right now, this commission has nothing governing it, right?
Yeah.
They don't have any rules.
Well, that's what they're trying. That's what we're trying to get put in place. So right now, there's not, other than the Roberts rules, and the rules of professionalism and good conduct, as decided upon by ourselves. Yeah. So with that in mind, there's also no legislative things that we're looking at this point. So right now, it's. There was the initial thing going back to Senator Milner's request, but right now it's actually getting more into the weeds of working together to create common vocabulary. So there's more work that's in the weeds right now of really getting some of this really in-depth work done, and it's not about changing things through the legislature. So in speaking to the sense of urgency right now, I think the sense of urgency is determined by you folks around the table to decide what the order of operations should be, because we're not talking about policy at this time at the committee level. It's about other things that are happening about wording and common things and getting.
So taking a break for a couple of months, you think?
Well, they're meeting so they're meeting all the time to work some of these things out, but it's not to the policy level at this point.
So,
please go ahead.
So I just wanted to explain to you guys because it seems like I've been on this board a long time now. and something that was brought up yesterday. When I first got on the board, there were like over 40 advisory committees to the board, and some of them were hidden. We didn't know that they existed. And so they put me in charge of a committee, and for 2 years we dug into everything and pulled out all the committees. We decided which ones the board needed, which ones the board didn't need, which ones were functioning, which ones were not functioning, and all of that stuff. And we worked the task force.
I did that years before you guys did it.
So we worked on it, and then we pulled it all together. And so Lorraine can tell you all of this stuff, right? And so when I said to Angie one day when we were talking about this commission that I was on, or this committee that I was on, so what is this, right? Because I look at that now, right? And she goes, oh, good question. Yeah. Right? She goes, so we've got to have something written up, a policy written up for this. And so since then, we've been trying to put something together, but we found out that it doesn't fit the same format as all the other advisory committee and task force because it's outside entities coming in.
And so
it's different. Until we know what it is, we can't really define it and put it to paper. And so does that help you guys understand?
Yes, so make an executive decision.
And so
it is this.
So
maybe we've got to have that.
Yeah.
We've got to do
So
that.
they've got to have that
policy.
policy.
Under advisory committees.
And I think the important point of clarification, and I don't think that within the verbiage as I read it yesterday fully clarifies it. The difference being that if it's a commission at what the legislative level looks at it, it's a group of entities that are state entities with an equal vote, and that it doesn't go through one of their boards before going directly to the legislature.
And I understand
So
that,
but I don't think that's clarified in the
but
document.
if the legislature gave us the nod to pull this together, then they gave us some level of authority.
Right. So then we wouldn't call it a commission.
It would have to be called something else.
And sure, different name.
Well,
That's the point that we've really got to get.
If you talk to Sid will tell you that when she was there, she said, yes, I'll take it, because she felt like it was important that the board have the ability to bring everybody together. And so, but she didn't necessarily mean the board was going to control everything, that it was just going to bring these people together and they were going to have
But if it's through the board, is it really a commission? I think.
So as staff, what can we do to help with getting this information so that when we bring it back, the course of action for full discussion, because I think this whole discussion will have to happen all over again if we go full board. It's not ready to go to full
I
board.
think it needs to ask them to send the policy
in the committee to be able to say, are they a commission, or if they are not a commission, and they would like, if they're having it go to the board. If it's a commission, then we need to actually say yes, and we want it statutorily almost.
Yes, because
and then if not, then
we can't pretend we can.
What was the language when it was given to us? Is that documented anywhere? Or is this just
Can I make a point about that?
informal?
Yeah. So I assume it might be referenced in the minutes. It is really not uncommon at all during interim for somebody to present a policy proposal to an interim committee and have them respond, you all need to get together and don't come back until you've talked to each other about it. And I don't know if it was more formally communicated than, okay, from Senator Milliner, they want to know that all stakeholders were consulted. And so it's more like an imperative or a request by the interim committee that, like, get your ducks in a row and then come back. But if it were a formal commission in statute or anything like that, it attracts all sorts of open meeting and transparency obligations. I was part of a task group that came about from an interim study item, and we had to have legislative staff there and record every session. So, like, if it hasn't gotten to that level, that means it's not formalized, it's not written down anywhere.
It's not statute. But I would ask Patty that, since we've had so many discussions about this, I mean, this is like the second or third time we've discussed this, that you maybe talk to Mark when you go to executive committee, because he was going to refer it to a committee, see if he could refer that policy to us and see if we can work on it. Because they referred it to law and licensing, and then they thought, what are we doing with this? We don't know what this is, because we're the ones who've been working on it.
May I get a sense of direction from standards committee members, which is if there's a preference here as to whether it's a commission made with entities reporting directly to the legislature, or if we would like for it to be a task force or an advisory committee that would then get the consensus, or kind of what Anna was talking about, to get consensus and talk about these things, and then have it go through the board to then go to the legislature. And I'm not sure, this is up to you to decide if you want to call, like, what is the pulse of this group, so that then when we're going to the advisory group now, we can give them some sort of a lead.
Yeah, let's just, Scott, what's your...
Well, I think group 2. I mean, this is school safety. We're the ones most impacted by it. All these other groups are auxiliary groups that are helping out and providing services. But it's the schools we're talking about. So I think it needs to go through the school board. I don't know. I mean, there may be people who don't want to take on that responsibility, but who else are we going to let make those decisions?
It's the governor's office.
Janet, what's your...
The governor's office.
Well, that's what happened, but then it's going to be out of line with what we might think.
I don't like the idea that they can just do something in a closed meeting and go directly to the legislature. That's not making public policy.
So I have to explain that the first meeting that we had, or maybe second, Tammy Piper came and spoke, and said, all these agencies are agencies of the governor. The governor feels like we should be over this. And it was kind of a fight to get it to be in our arena, because he feels like public safety. And she can make that argument that it should be under the governor's office. And so I don't really want that fight. I want us, when we first got together, it was like everybody was working in their own little silos, and they were defending their own territory, and they were saying, no, we should be in charge of this, and we should be in charge of this. And it's just gotten to the point where everybody's kind of working together and talking together. So I don't know if I want to go back to the fight of.
So you're a bit one.
I'm not thinking that another agency who feels like we're an agency as well is going to want to have us approve some of their work.
Lisa, what's your vote? Or, it's not a vote, but what's your feeling?
In a month, I'm not going to have skin in the game.
But you did.
I'll do now. I think there needs to be an executive decision on what kind of committee this is.
Right, but do you have a preference on, does it go straight to the legislature, or does it come through here first?
I don't know that we have a say. I mean,
you have a preference.
I don't think we have a say. If we do, then
in a
here,
perfect world,
then
what would you vote for?
Bring it to the board. I mean, because goodness sakes, we have mental health services in our schools now, and now we're over that, and FERPA trumps HIPAA, and so now we're in a whole new ball game that we're, I think, unconstitutionally not supposed to be a part of. So the board needs input, and I think this needs to come to the board.
Patty, does that help give you what you need?
Can I make another comment?
Yeah.
Legislation usually doesn't come to the board. We don't develop legislation and then bring it to a committee.
But they bring it during legislative session to the board.
No, they don't.
Just this is so
not
different.
Not to approve a draft
legislation.
This is the board. But we'll say, okay, we want you to find somebody to run a bill on this issue. But we don't develop legislation and then send it through a board committee.
No, but it's just so ultimately this comes back to the school.
So I think maybe
that's why
Patty needs to have a conversation with Angie.
Personally, your parents need to be involved.
Do you want to comment?
This is a little bit of a complicated issue.
Yes.
Because let's just take it to the school level. When there's an emergency, whether it's a hazmat or an intruder or whatever, and all of a sudden there's multiple agencies on in the school, your superintendent is no longer really the one in charge.
No.
It goes to a command center.
Yep.
So if it's fire, guess what? Fire marshal trumps everybody else. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's why when this commission was put together, but through governor down through legislative, that's why, because all of these separate entities work differently. And so it's trying to get, you have fire code, you have evacuation code, you have all these things coming into play when you're talking about school safety. And it's not just under the purview of schools, even though the location may be at our school. But you have other codes that come into play that trump school learning. Does that make sense? So it's underneath the umbrella, but I understand what Linda Hansen is saying here is that it's really not underneath completely the purview of school and school only.
If all we were talking about was those kind of situations, then I see that point. But we're talking about all of this integrated school safety, and we're bringing in everything that impacts the well-being of the kids. And so who's going to coordinate that if it's not us?
So if I may, this could be an argument made to get rid of the board, right? Because in a way that the board's no longer legitimate in this, and that everything else trumps that. And if it's integrated, then why have the board, right? If the board's not, and I firmly oppose that idea, because I think taxpayers and students and parents need to be represented, but it's just one more cog in the wheel of arguments of saying it's not valuable, the board shouldn't have a say, right? This should be mandated by the legislature through the, whatever, and not have input. I think that's a huge problem.
Okay, Patty?
I'm wondering, does all of it need to be brought back, or does this committee like to approve the piece that Voorhees was putting in, just that the part in blue? Is there a piece, or just bring the whole thing back?
Bring the whole thing
Bring the whole thing back. Okay, and is that going to vote on?
Well, we need to vote on it. I mean, we've been discussing it, so.
I would make that motion. I made a motion to take it to the, and get input from the committee. From the committee. This from the other committee, and then bring it back to the board, and then bring it back to the committee.
Okay. Will you restate that motion one more time? Because that was really beautiful.
Right? Right. That was terrible. So my motion, I move that we send this back to the School Safety Commission, or whatever it's called, that committee, for input, and then have them bring it back to this committee. Have Patty bring it back with their input, and then I also would ask, maybe in addition, that Patty talk to board leadership and ask that the policy 1004 come to us so we can discuss it.
1004.
Okay, that's 1004.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is to, and correct me if I'm wrong, send board policy 5009 back to the School Safety Advisory Committee, have them bring that back, have Patty talk to board leadership about, was it 1004, and then we discuss it then.
Could I speak
Scott,
to that?
discussion of the
When
motion.
we say we're sending it to the School Safety Advisory Committee, that's this that's this committee, right? I would speak against that. I think that we need to make up our mind what we want to do as a school board before we send a policy to them, and then who's going to be the loudest voice in the room at that meeting? There's no one in charge right now.
These two will be there.
Is that right?
Yeah, so
we have
we're in charge. USB is in charge of the meeting.
In charge of the meeting,
So
but
you could bring
up
there's no one, there's no
that go
chairman
out.
there
It's
that
Robert
can
Rules.
trump
No, there's a
everyone or
chairman.
anything.
Chris
Is
is
there?
the chairman.
Yeah.
Christy Walker is the chairman.
Yeah. I just don't know that makes sense until we know what we want to do, to send it to that committee.
I'm just a little concerned about the disability section and whether that really fits our purview. I mean, that's our purview. And if they want to expand into that, that's one of the things that I think we should ask them, because I'm not exactly sure. Not that I think it doesn't need to be somewhere, but I'm not sure if it fits this.
But it's not ready yet.
It's not.
It's not.
But if we do this, then
that's why
it just delays it. We can have more discussion.
Yeah.
So, am I taking it to committee?
We're going to have
or
a vote. Well, let's vote.
Oh.
So all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Okay, motion fails.
Okay, it's just going to sit.
It's going to sit.
Okay, we'll put some. Put more thought into it.
Well, it'll just sit. And
So we that means it doesn't come back here either.
Yeah, it's not coming.
So
It's
no
not doing
decisions are made
anything
at all.
Yeah, nothing's
So-
made.
It's just
Yeah.
going to sit.
What if I make a motion?
Do we have an alternative motion?
That we bring, well, it can be a motion on top, that one failed.
Okay,
So
not
we
an
can
alternative, just
make
another
a motion that we discuss this with board leadership and with staff and come back with a recommendation.
Come back to committee?
No later than 2 months from now.
There's no.
What kind of
meeting in
recommendation?
Okay.
What kind of recommendation?
So in August, that's based off 1004.
Yeah.
The recommendation would be based off 1004.
Recommendation would be as to USBE's role.
So that would
with
be
the committee.
1004.
Yeah, that ties to 1004.
Okay, so Scott, say that one more time.
I'll try.
Okay, let's do it.
So
I want to make sure I get
I
it clear.
move that we table this and that we bring it back after staff consults with board leadership and comes up with a recommendation with regard to the board's role in this committee.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is to table this conversation, have staff talk to leadership about 1004, and bring it back to committee in August.
The board, the USBE's role.
Yeah, USBE's role in this. Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Motion passes. No, I saw
This one's a mess.
This one's hard.
Conversation with.
Yes, I start with Sid every time. Sid my go-to.
Sid has very strong
opinions about the coordinator.
Coordinator. Yeah, and I think the coordination of the committee doesn't need to be a board. Yeah.
So you can't just keep kicking the can down the road. Which is what we've been doing for about 6 months.
Down the road.
You know, I'm kind of sorry that I ever brought up that we needed